Celtics Beat is brought to you by Prizepicks.
Everybody, welcome in another edition of Celtics Beat. Great to have you here with us. Adam Kaufman and Valenti, we're always here. Our special guest today and a first-timer here on this show, I think anyway, maybe like years and years ago, but I think this is the first time. Senior NBA writer over at Yahoo, Devine, who we're thrilled to have with us. He is actually out in Indiana covering the NBA Finals, so nice and timely. We are going to get to plenty of things Celtics related and talk about a series that not many people expected, at least through 3 games. But first and foremost, we appreciate everyone hanging out here with us. Rate, review, subscribe to the podcast, search Celtics Beat wherever you get your podcasts. Certainly go to the CLNS YouTube page, the CLNS Celtics All Access page. You will find all of our shows, shorts, other Celtics content across the network, so much more. And again, we thank you for spending some of your week with us. There are plenty of NBA podcasts to choose from. So the fact that you are here with us, get a little Celtics twist on what is happening across the NBA. We're grateful for it. And Dan, first and foremost, welcome, man. It's great to see you. Great to have you. Where I think I have to begin, first most logical question naturally is, has anyone from the New York Knicks reached out to your bosses at Yahoo to see if you're interested in interviewing for the head coaching position?
Admittedly, I have not talked to all of my bosses recently, but my primary 2 editors have not made me aware of any communication. So it hasn't come down the list yet. I mean, I will say this much for them. They're at least trying to hire currently employed positive head coaches. So like if they get to me, they start asking for me, then things have really gone off the rails. I think the fact that I was like looking at our NBA coverage on Yahoo Sports this morning, and it's like a bunch of final stories and then Knicks coaching search tracker. And I was like, oh my God, we've gotten to the point where we now have a running list of who has denied permission. And you know, it's getting weird really. Like 2 weeks ago, this team was like 2 wins away from the finals. And now it's very, very odd times.
No, it's wild. I think they're like 0 for 6 or 0 for 5, whatever it is at this point. I saw a tweet. I wish I could remember who sent it because some, random account that it went viral. It made me laugh, but I'd love to shout out the author of the tweet. But it said something like, the Knicks are going to have to request Doc Rivers just to see one go through the hoop, which, it's very, very appropriate. It's great. Like, was this... we're not going to make this about the Knicks, and we'll sort of liken it back to a conversation we had about Joe Mazzulla with our guest last week, which was a lot of fun. But just was this the Knicks' plan? Like, we're going to get rid of Tom Thibodeau, who's you can make the case that maybe they had to a certain degree plateaued with him, and maybe his his style got stale or his voice got stale or what have you. But to just say like, all right, we're, wash our hands of Tibbs. We're moving on. We're going in a different direction, but we're going to start by finding, but maybe one of these other guys who already has a job wants to leave that job and come work with us. We're going to try and recruit as opposed to, the vacancies that at least historically, and I say this as someone who is well aware that Doc orchestrated his trade out of Boston to the Clippers. So it's not like these things don't happen, obviously, but they're good qualified free agent head coaches, but the fact that they have started with, all right, let's go get Kidd, let's go get Donovan, let's go get you name it. It's, I don't know, if I'm a Knicks fan, which I'm not, it would be driving me nuts.
I would, as a New Yorker who has a lot of Knicks fans in his life, I would say it's definitely driving them nuts. I would say that's a pretty safe assumption. I worked under the assumption when this all happened that you move on as quickly from Tibbs as they did. I think it was like less than 3 days after the end of the Eastern Conference Finals, because you have a defined plan in mind, right? And you've mentioned these things do happen. They don't happen all that often where a team goes and gets rid of its current head coach to hire someone off someone else's bench. I think the last one I can remember that was like that was Chris Finch in Minnesota, but he was an assistant in Denver, I believe, or was it New Orleans at that point? I forget. But he was an assistant elsewhere and then got hired right away. Like the management of the Timberwolves went and got him from the other team's bench because they knew that's exactly who we want and this is exactly how we're going to operate. And so I assumed something similar. And what we've learned over the years is when you make assumptions, especially about the New York Knicks, you wind up looking like an ass. And here we are. I don't think their plan was to just go get someone else from another team, because obviously that requires the other team playing ball, and you need to, compensate that other team. I don't know that I think what we're arriving at now is I'm not sure there was a defined plan beyond. We think we've reached the end of the line with Tom Thibodeau. We don't think he's going to be able to elevate our offense and the structure of the team we've given him to the place that makes us a championship contender, gets us past this like ceiling we're smacking into. And so in that respect, I understand that. If you've come to the internal assessment that this cannot get you where you want to go, then the most logical thing to do is move on. Moving on without a clear next step is, I think, a little more concerning. And so, now we enter, I guess, what is the most prolonged and public coaching search in recent NBA history. And we'll have to see how far it wends on as we go through the finals and toward the draft.
Yeah, we had Matt Moore on last week, and we kind of framed this discussion around, look, we know Joe's done a lot of winning. He's won an NBA championship, maybe one of the best three-point shooting teams in the history of basketball. They've been very successful. But history shows you recently that nobody's safe. I mean, how many coaches of the year have gotten fired recently through the last 5 years? I mean, Mike Malone still, I could not even fathom that anybody would fire that guy. And I framed it in this way of this year for Mazzulla is not going to be, the expectations just won't be there because there's no Jason Tatum. They're clearly, again, everybody assumes that they will cut some salary, get under the second apron, and try and sort of reset their future a little bit. That being said, I also framed it in the way of, well, Mazzulla Ball worked in 24. It did not work in 25. So now I would say Mazzulla's got to have a curveball coming. There's got to be a tweak to Mazzulla Ball that makes it less predictable, more chaotic, more like the Pacers, more like the Thunder and what their offense does. And so he has a long time to experiment with that. And if there's no growth this upcoming year, I would argue that he's on the hot seat because of the way this team is structured and built. They're built to compete right now and for the future. Am I crazy for suggesting that? Because we got a lot of pushback on that last week.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, my immediate reaction is that would be awfully rash, and it would indicate to me either a dramatic change in attitude from Brad Stevens toward Joe Mazzulla, because I think the fundamentals of what he likes about Joe Mazzulla, what he thinks it makes Joe Mazzulla a valuable and additive head coach are totally. I think those are still there, right? I don't think anything has changed about those. Or it would indicate that new ownership has a different way of viewing things, and that's certainly possible. But you are definitely right in the context of there is no grace period anymore. If you were good enough to win the championship, but you don't have that organizational alignment, or you have the one down year that looks real bad on the way out, it's not just Michael Malone, having a fallout with Calvin Booth. It's also Frank Vogel, eventually the Lakers just kind of tuning him out, or, Darvin Ham getting to the conference finals and then immediately being ousted. There's no safe harbor. Nick Nurse won the title, but then he was on the way out in a couple of years after that. And so it's not just the guys that build you there, but then can't go all the way through. It's the guys who get through the finish line, but then, what have you done for me lately? I think the acceleration of the NBA, the tightening of these contending windows, the sheer amount of money being outlaid, the penalties for being in the tax, for being in the repeater tax, for doing it multiple years, the team building restrictions of being over the first or second apron, all these things, it has all kind of coalesced into just a titanic amount of pressure that seems to be constricting these coaches and their opportunities even tighter than ever. So I would be super surprised if that's if a down year, or an uneven looking down year that wasn't didn't showcase a whole lot of new wrinkles from Mazzulla led to that kind of ouster. But I think you're right. I think the general idea of you need to be able to take whatever is in the chopped basket for you, right? Whatever's in the pantry in the cupboard for you, and make the meal out of it. Like that's why Rick Carlisle's team is up 2-1 in the finals, because he doesn't make the team play the way he's always wanted them to play. He gets the guys, and then he makes the system work out of that. And I think Mazzulla has certainly shown some flexibility in that way, but a lot of it has been pretty dogmatic. We'll see if he's able to adjust there. But I think I would have to imagine he's got a longer leash, but who knows?
Yeah, one of the things I brought up with Matt last week, and you just alluded to it, is I think the relationship matters. In the cases of some of these coaches that have been maybe surprisingly shown the door, people that were surprised by Jenkins or Malone or some of these other firings, these are coaches that either dramatically underachieved, or they were at odds with management or ownership, or there was a level of friction there. Maybe it was in the locker room, wherever it was, there was the underlying issue that was like, okay, I think we need to move in a different direction here. Joe Mazzulla, at least as of right now, according to anything that you see here publicly is on display, Joe and Brad, and this comes from Brad in particular, Brad is Joe's biggest advocate. Like, these guys couldn't be more aligned. And so that doesn't mean Joe Mazzulla, like, for all the people out there that, fresh off a championship, it's like, give this guy a lifetime contract. Like, for all the people that want him to be Eric Spoelstra here, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's, those are awfully very, very, very few and far between. It's Spo, and it's Pop, and like the end, probably.
Yeah.
It's these guys that just bounce around. And Mazzulla, who knows what his future is in Boston, but I don't think it's short. I think he's going to be around for the foreseeable future, which extends, maybe that's a handful of years, maybe it's more than that, but I don't think he's even remotely close to being on a hot seat. But to Ev's point, there is an adjustment that needs to come, and knowing Joe as we have come to know him as I don't know, regular, obviously, daily spectators of the Joe Mazzulla show, I think that he's probably, in a sick and twisted way, kind of excited about the year to come and some of the different things that he can experiment with, knowing that in all likelihood he's not going to have Tatum for the entire year, and knowing that this roster is going to look different come opening day, whether it's Porzingis, Holiday, Hauser, in a weird universe, Jaylen Brown, like knowing that something is going to change considerably in terms of that top 6-7 guys. Maybe Horford retires, maybe Cornette's gone. Like this, I mean, the roster could turn over quite a bit conceivably. And I think he's probably pretty amped to jump in and see how he can tinker and toy with that, not just, as you mentioned with Carlisle, sort of fit a system around the guys that he has, but continue to sort of play in his bag of tricks. What are some of the things over the last couple of years with Joe that, you just think, especially as an outsider, right, as someone who's not covering the Celtics on a daily basis, that you watch and you see and say, all right, like this needs to be modified. When the 3-point shot is failing, they need to go here. Like, where do you start your critique of Joe Mazzulla?
I guess I would say just the sort of dogmatic approach, right? The rigidness of it. I think that there's an awful lot to be commended about saying, this is what I believe, and so I'm going to believe it 200 miles per hour, 200% all the time. And like, we have a reason to think this is a good way to do things, so we're going to do it to the absolute utmost of our ability. I think there's something to be said for that. And I think that it is really, it really puts the team in a position to maximize its advantages. I think if you have a team that has different or fewer advantages, which is what we're about to see, you maybe can't afford to be as dogmatic or as rigidly principled in saying we are only going to play this way. So also my first thought on that is just, I would like to see him show me other pitches, but I don't necessarily think that like we've seen enough to indicate that he can't do that or that he wouldn't do that. He's obviously been somebody who's capable of and willing to adjust in different ways over the course of a series, over the course of, as circumstances dictate, guys are in and out of the lineup with injury or whatever. I think that just presuming he can't probably is, insufficiently respectful of somebody who has done an awful lot in a very short time in his coaching career, and who has the ear of somebody who has been one of the most flexible and smart and forward-thinking coaches and executives since he got to Boston and Brad Stevens. So I think like that's where it would start with me, is when you give him a very different roster, when you give him a very different set of strengths and weaknesses and say, you have to figure out how to minimize those and maximize those, let's see how he does it. But I would feel pretty optimistic about his capacity to do so, because he's shown an awful lot in a short period of time.
You brought up a good point a while ago about how, like, we don't know the relationship between Joe Mazzulla and Bill Chisholm and how this is going to work out.
Sure.
It's unknown at this point. You can't say in the direction that there's any traction, right? Because we don't know yet. We're learning. But one of the things that I think the Knicks are providing the world here, and you get back to Joe Mazzulla's won a lot of games, and this is like a lot of people came at us coughing for like, you guys don't like Joe Mazzulla. I'm like, we're one of the most pro Joe Mazzulla podcasts there is out there. We love the guy. I mean, I brag about him bringing other things from, whether it's the soccer world or the animal instinct world, like bringing it all together to make it all work. I think there's a lot of beauty in that. But I think the Knicks are showing you right now that just because you don't get a maximum, you don't maximize the talent on your roster, doesn't always mean the grass is greener on the other side. Like, this is the thing with Mazzulla, where like, okay, like maybe the 3-heavy offense isn't the best thing in the world, but man, he's won a lot of games and not a lot of time. And even thrown into this thing, he had no prior experience. He was just really like, again, the second row Joe thing. Like, he went from that to being one of the winningest head coaches to start a head coaching career in the history of the NBA. Like, there has to be some middle ground here. And that the reason why I bring up the Knicks a lot is just because, like, they're showing everybody, don't be so rash about things. Like, wait. Like, there is some, simplicity in like waiting for the dust to settle and understand, like, because like the finals are going on right now, which I'm sure we'll get to in a second. And what you see every game is maybe dictating what the future of the league looks like, right? You're looking at, a Benedict Mathurin or Aaron Nesmith or TJ McConnell, or you name a role player, what that particular player might be doing to shape the league a little bit differently next year. Like, I just think as people get all over Joe Mazzulla, and they always do, it's the way Boston works. Alex Cora's on his way out. Mike Vrabel will be, has a very, short runway here. Same with Marco Stern's going to have a little bit of a bigger one for the Bruins, but like,
it's already a failure.
I know, right? He just got here. But it's like one of these things where people, they want immediacy and immediate results. And I think Joe has delivered. But as we get back to, like, it feels like to me, Dan, Boston has a good thing. Don't screw with it. But at the same time, if things don't get better, like, this could get real interesting real quick from a coaching standpoint, from a team, team building standpoint and all that kind of stuff, as this CBA has thrown everything, I think, in the spin cycle, and we don't even know where we're landing yet. You know what I mean?
I think that's a really huge point in this. And, Adam Silver talked about it in his pre-finals press conference and said, like, the idea here is not necessarily to enforce parity, but it's to create parity of opportunity, so that if you're a well-managed organization, you got a puncher's chance no matter what. The flip side of that, though, is like, if one thing goes wrong, you can wind up at the bottom of the mountain pretty quick. And so that it puts the pressure on an organization to continue to remain well managed, well organized, and be able to pivot from injuries or fallbacks or whatever pretty quickly and pretty gracefully. And I think with the Knicks, obviously to some degree an incomplete, because we don't know actually what the hire is going to be. We don't know how that coach may or may not be able to better maximize the talent on the roster, all things like that. But to your point about, maybe the better move is sometimes discretion's the better part of valor, just like sit tight and wait. On the run up to the finals, and even I forget if it was in a presser during the finals or if it was during the Eastern Conference Finals. It's all melting together in my brain right now. But Tyrese Halliburton multiple times has gone, effusively praised the front office of the Pacers for being patient, for saying, giving us not just 1 year or 1.5 years after we got the Siakam trade together, or, whatever, a full 18 months, a full 2 years of being together to go through the experience of getting drummed out of the playoffs by the Celtics last year, to come back, get Benedict Mathurin healthy again, reintegrated into the organization, into the rotation rather. Siakam, get him a full off season, go through the early season injuries they had, but don't make a rash deal. Like, keep the main guys together, keep as many of the guys together as possible, really. Like, most of their rotation has been here now going on 2 full years, to give those lessons you learn an opportunity to bear fruit, and the things that you learned from your failures and from where you fell short along the way, how you can implement adjust to those things, implement them, and move forward. And they, Halliburton, among other players there, have said, like, that played a really big role in us getting to this point. So it's not always easy. You need ownership that is willing to take a longer view, that is not necessarily pursuing short-term, satisfaction or short-term gains. And there might be a million different incentives for that, or reasons for that. Sometimes it's just I bought the team, I want to win right now, which what we've seen in Phoenix, and that's gone great. And sometimes it might be a profit motive, right? Like, I shelled out an insane amount of money for this team. We need to make sure we're getting as many postseason gates as possible. And so whatever the points of emphasis are, whatever the incentive structure is, I think there's an awful lot to be said for being able to sort of take a breath, take a second, especially in a situation like the Celtics are. Nobody in their right mind would blame the Celtics for things looking a little bit worse next year than you might have anticipated. So take that opportunity maybe to sort of figure out some other off-speed pitches, as you mentioned, a few other different plans of attack, what the roster looks like for the next couple of years after that, and what how Mazzulla is going to be able to best maximize that.
We will get into Jaylen Brown and his off-season arthroscopic knee surgery. How nice to see both Brown and Tatum in hospital beds this offseason. That's been really cool, post-leg surgeries. And we will talk about these NBA Finals. We'll do that in just a moment. First, a quick break. Tell you about our good friends over at Prizepicks. Prizepicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members, billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prizepicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to everyone. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Hear that again, 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prizepicks.
Best place to get real money sports action, Kaufman. We talk about this all the time. 10 million users. You can battle them all. And for me, we keep going back to flex play. And with game 3 last night, flex play for me, 1 for 2 in that particular regard. CLNS had the free square that I promoted. CLNS also promoted. All he needed was Jaylen Williams, to score more than 0.5 points, which he did. Super easy. That was awesome. So I had that guy. I also had Obi Toppin more than 4 rebounds. He had 6. But for the first time, Kaufman, Chet Holmgren let me down. He had more than 8 rebounds in this game. He had 10. The first time that's happened pretty much for me since using that as a part of my play. Over more than less than 8 rebounds, 8.5 rebounds, 9 rebounds finally came to bite me in the butt for the first time. And I'll ask you as we pivot here.
Sure.
Do we double down on that for next time? Do we
go back to
that was an aberration?
I don't think you go back to Chet. I don't think you do. I think that, I mean, what's the number sitting at for the next game? You looking at 8.5, 9.5?
Let me pull it up for you, because we're doing this in real time, because that's a spectacular question. If I go to the Prizepicks app and I open the NBA portion of it, you can scroll through the tabs, pull up rebounds. Again, super easy, super fun to use. All of the tips of your finger. Right now, Kaufman, as we stand here, it's 8.5.
I couldn't do it. In fact, if I was going to play it, I think I'd look to his over.
Yeah, the more than.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll talk more about that, because
I have to think about that.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about that through the next.
Here's the real thing that you need to consider, and we'll get into this a little bit more on the show itself. But do you lean into the role players? Role players, like is TJ McConnell or Benedict Mathurin or some of the other role player starters? You're going to go over on, like, I'm making up the number, but it feels about right. 8.5, 9.5 points for Obi Toppin. That kind of
Obi Toppin right now, the more than line is 9.5. Just to keep you up to date. And I was looking for Mathurin, and Mathurin's right now is more than 10.5, 10.5. Mathurin had 27 and 22 minutes in game 3. look, he can heat up
Bucket.
in a minute.
Walking bucket.
Yeah. So just to keep your eye on that. And again, make sure you stay tuned for me and CLNS. We're going to be giving out free squares until this thing is over. So just stay tuned for that, because it's always good to get basically free money. I love free money. It's the best thing in the world. And getting your money from Prizepicks could not be easier. Venmo, buddy. Just have it go right to your Venmo account. There's nothing easier than that. Nothing.
Make sure you check it out. Download the app today. Use the code CLNS. Get $50 instantly after playing your first $5 lineup. Again, download the Prizepicks app. Use the promo code. It is CLNS. You get $50 instantly after playing your first lineup for only $5. Prizepicks. Run your game. We've got Dan Devine here with us from Yahoo Sports, senior NBA writer, talking all things Celtics and the NBA. And of course, when it comes to the NBA, after a nearly week-long break between the conference finals and NBA finals, when a lot of people had to remind themselves that the season wasn't over yet, Dan, we are now through 3 games getting, honestly, a hell of an NBA finals. I mean, there were all these concerns and still comments. Adam Silver, the commissioner, having to be interviewed talking about it. The ratings and market sizes and all of this. If the fact of the matter is, and we said this going into the series, because we are on this program, Pacers truthers, we have had respect for Indiana really going back to the sweep to end their season last year when they were as competitive as they were in those 4 games against the Celtics. We've had respect for the Pacers all year long. In fact, we have been saying for weeks, if not months on this show, that if not a healthy Celtics team, the Pacers, that is the most dangerous team in the East. And sure enough, but here, I mean, they are doing something, Dan, that I certainly did not foretold, right? I felt the Pacers were going to be spunky. They were going to put up a fight. They were going to be annoying, but ultimately this is still Thunder in 5, maybe Thunder in 6. This is not 2-1 Indiana, with the Pacers all of a sudden, sort of controlling their own destiny to a certain degree. And yeah, we know what happens when you can go up 2-1 the NBA finals. Look at the Celtics back in the 2022. Like these things do fall apart. So like, I don't want to put the cart ahead of the horse when it comes to Indiana, but the fact that we're even able to have this conversation, and you wrote a piece obviously for Yahoo about so many of the role players that showed out in game 3. Mathurin obviously went nuts. McConnell was great. Obi Toppin had some huge moments. And even though they're starters, like I will include guys like Nembhard, like Nesmith, who we can talk a little bit about, former Celtic, as people know listening to this show. Like these guys, they're there's the Halliburtons and the Siakams and the Turners, and then there's kind of everybody else. And last night it was the everybody else that really stole the show in a lot of different ways. And that is what you need in the NBA finals and any playoff series to win. It's definitely what you need in home games. And it will never cease to amaze me the way that role players go nuts at home in these important moments in the NBA, like in more so in basketball than any other sport. But this series, I'm just, I want to start, I guess, with this. I mean, how surprised are you, first and foremost, that we have ourselves a compelling series that through 3 games, genuinely, I don't think we may still believe or talk ourselves into the Thunder. The Vegas odds makers still heavily favor Oklahoma City, but I don't think we really know who's going to win this series the way a lot of us believed we knew before the series even began.
I think that's absolutely right. I felt like one of the more rare people that actually had it in 6. I was like, Thunder in 6. And that felt like a gamble, saying it'll still be them, but they'll get one more game. And in my thought process, it was having been with the Eastern Conference Finals back and forth before this. I was like, that team is not just going to go out quick. Like the deposits they put into opponents on like the way that they get into your legs, the way they get into your bench, the way that they make you defend like the full 94 feet, the full, width of the court, and the multiple actions within a possession. Like it's just the wear down effect of all of that, on top of also on the defensive end, like the full court pressure, the way they have multiple guys in the backcourt, they concede nothing, they make nothing easy. And then being able to go 11 or 12 deep or whatever, allows them to bring in fresh legs constantly, like hockey line changes, And so that's not a team that just gets spanked and gets blown out. When or hasn't been at least. And so I looked at that and I said, I think maybe there'll be like one Rick Carlisle does some wizard stuff and figures out like it's a weird zone or it's this kind of inverted offense adjustment that like wrong foots them for a quarter and that gets them a game, or like they hit 23 threes in one game and that's the one they get. And then they've kind of gotten like versions of both of those in the first 3 games, but still also haven't had like the one, what do they call it? Like magnet ball, like, outside, like how the hell do you get all those shots to go in? They haven't really had that yet. And they've still won 2 out of the 3 games. They've only been, I think, consistently the better team in one of them, but that doesn't matter, right? Like, the consistent pressure they put on you to make decisions. And I think like so many old coaches you've heard over the years be like, make the defense make a decision, put them in a place where they've got to make a choice. And 9 times out of 10, so great teams will get those choices right more often than not. Nobody always gets them right. And so if you can put even great defenses in a position where they've got to rotate 4 or 5 times, they've got to make 4 or 5 closeouts, they've got to make 3 or 4 decisions of, do I switch and hand off there, or do I, like, somebody's going to blink eventually. And then this team is as good as any I've seen in a long, long time at, in that moment of indecision and that moment of, shuddering or blinking, finding exactly where your weak spot is. And the ball goes there immediately. The Thunder have been as good a defense as I've seen in, maybe, I don't know, since like the 08 Celtics. Like, they've been one of the best defenses in the NBA in years and years. And even they are having a really hard time consistently putting fingers in the dam and stopping all the leaks. And the fact that we've got to the end of game 3 and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander played, I think, like 42 or 43 minutes and looked exhausted by the end of it with the pressure that Andrew Nembhard, and then also Ben Shepherd off the bench picking up full court, Mathurin putting his body on the line there. Like the physicality from the opening tip for the entirety of his time out there, the waves of defenders he's got to deal with. It seems like the amount of creation he's having to do seems to be exhausting him. There's only one day between 3 and 4. There's not the extended break at this point in the series. I don't think any of the Pacers played more than like 34 minutes last night. And they are the team that consistently looks fresher at the end of these games and is able to close them out. That is a dangerous, dangerous place for Oklahoma City to be in. And so, I mean, you're right, these 2-1 series, they can flip back the other way. We have seen that before. I think the Pacers, though, are going to make you take it. They're not going to give it to you. And the Thunder are in a position, like the most adverse position they've been in so far. They were able to fight back off the ropes against the Nuggets in round 2. That was a Nuggets team that was basically playing like 4.5 guys by the end of it. This Pacers team is dramatically different. They don't have Jokic, but the collective that they've got has become one of the most impressive things in the league, and it's put them within 2 wins of something that I don't think anybody anticipated before the season.
I'll piggyback off that a little bit because I think, there's a lot of different ways we can go this discussion, but trying again, make this a team building idea here. We always hear rotations get shortened the further you go. And the Pacers are bucking that trend.
Yeah.
You're playing 9, 10, 11, 12 guys in the NBA Finals, and it's working. Is that sustainable? Or is this just a one-off that, look, it's the perfect combination, it's the perfect blend, it's the perfect coach to put all this together. It's Halliburton being so, I would say, he's more of he can't score. I'm not saying he can't, but he's more of a facilitator. He prefers to play that way. They have a team-friendly, team style of playing offense and defense. So that it allows them to play 10, 11, 12 guys and be interchangeable. Is this repeatable, or is this just the perfect storm of play? And I'm not saying Oklahoma City doesn't do this too. They're playing a ton of guys too. Sure. But Indiana feels more successful with it right now.
Definitely. And I think that you saw even as the game was going on last night, game 3 rather, Mark Daigneault was tightening up his bench. He'll play, Isaiah Joe will get those minutes in the first half. They're not getting him in the second half. He starts the series with AJ Mitchell. AJ Mitchell has not seen the floor since the first half of game 1. When things get tighter, that the rotation does constrict for him. And Carlisle, it's just, they have so much confidence and so much faith in this style of play. It's funny. We just spent all that time talking about like Joe Mazzulla can't be dogmatic with his approach. The Pacers are dogmatic about this. They are like, we believe this is the best way for us to play. And I guess to some degree, it's a little bit of like a spin on the way the Celtics are built, because I don't want to turn this into a Jason Tatum, discussion, but like if the argument is if we don't have one of the three best players on the planet, how do we win? And we win by a top 7 that's better than everybody's, and with the 3-point variance, and with the way we can defend, and all those sorts of things. How do we augment the fact that we don't have, the MVP of the league? We don't have 1, 2, or 3, and we can get close to that with that one individual player, but then the entire thing around it has to be built a little bit differently. And with Halliburton, he's not one of those top 5 guys, right? He is maybe a top 5 offensive player in terms of the way he can facilitate for other people, and it's the way that overall, Carlisle keeps calling it the ecosystem, like the way that his playmaking, the speed, the fact that he can play fast and throw the ball all over the gym without turning it over, and the way that activates guys, like you are always live. You are always a live threat because he will throw it to you and find you. I think that has put them in position where, like, if we surround that guy with dudes who sprint and shoot, and like 9 of them, then that's our best way to win. And then it took them a year and a half to build a defense that could also support that. And because it turns out if you get a lot of guys that can run and shoot, like the fact that they can all run is already a good start. You can cover a lot of ground on defense. And then those guys, the specific ones that they've got with Nesmith and the physicality he brings at the point of attack on bigger wings, with Nembhard, the way he's able to just like completely crawl into guys at the point of attack. Siakam as more of like a great help defender, but they can kind of use Siakam and Obi Toppin to be more like sort of like, I guess, somewhat analogous to like Robert Williams was in Boston, where it's like we're going to put him on the weakest offensive player and let them roam to muck things up. Now, obviously, those guys are not anywhere near as destructive as Time Lord was during his time in Boston, but the general idea of that's where we can pivot our defense around and be able to plug things up behind the play, make it harder for you to get into the paint, make it harder for you to find your preferred passes. Like they've just figured out how to best, like the style that they have to play. These are the players we have. How do we get more guys that fit around that? And then what's the best way to optimize for that? And I don't know that it's necessarily, I mean, Miles Turner had said, I think pretty infamously before the conference or after the conference finals, I think we're a blueprint for the NBA. It's a lot easier to find these guys than it is to find the 2 or 3 best players in the world. And so I think from that perspective, and also costs a lot less money to sign these guys than it costs to sign the 2 or 3 best players in the world and to retain them. But that said, it's not easy. It's not easy to get them. It's not easy to see. I think if the Celtics knew exactly what Aaron Nesmith was going to be in a few years, maybe they would not have been as quick to move him. But they also know they needed Malcolm Brogdon at that point. And Malcolm Brogdon was 6th man of the year and was super valuable for that team at that time. So like you need to be lucky. You need to get a lot of bets right. And you need to be able to to correctly assess and assess your team and what's the best way to get the most out of the collective you got and out of the star you have. And the Pacers have done as good a job of that as just about anybody in the league.
I think Ev's question, is this repeatable, is an interesting one because it can be taken 2 different ways. The way that you took it and the way that he intended it, which is this a model for the rest of the league? Mm. Or is this repeatable can mean if the Pacers win, which would shock enough people to begin with. I mean, Thunder were like minus 700 Vegas favorites coming into this thing. But if the Pacers win, can they repeat? Can they do it again? And, apologies, I guess, to anyone that listened to last week's show with Matt Moore, because I brought this up then, but I think it's a conversation, worth having still, because I want different perspectives on it. I tweeted it out last night and I got a pretty split response from people in terms of, this is the most random championship since the 11 Mavericks, which, by the way, who was the head coach of that team? Right. I would argue it's, in some ways, even more random than that, closer to like 04 Pistons kind of random in terms of just, say what you will about Halliburton. And I was with Ev, another friend of ours, we were kind of quibbling over text earlier about like to what degree is Halliburton a superstar? Where is he in this hierarchy of the NBA? And even just amongst the 3 of us, there were wide-ranging perspectives on how he is viewed. And so they don't have, as you said, this consensus top 3 player. They don't have the MVP in SGA on the other side, or when Giannis or like Tatum, I think most would have viewed as a top 5 player last year. Yeah. Obviously, Jokic being the best player in the world, when he won and still, and all of these things. So I think a lot of us believe, win or lose, Thunder, they're going to be back. As long as they stay healthy, they'll be back. They're at the beginning of their window. Look at that team. The Pacers, it'd be pretty easy to argue to say, especially next year where the Celtics aren't going to look as they've looked, that the East is more wide open. And, Knicks are going through their changes. Maybe there's a Milwaukee bounce back. Maybe Giannis is gone and playing somewhere else. Does Kevin Durant come to the East and impact a team? Like, there's so many dominoes still to play themselves out, obviously, in the Eastern Conference in particular. You can look at that and say, Pacers were in the final handful last year. They might win the thing this year. Of course, they're going to contend next year. And there's still a part of me, and maybe I'm an idiot, Dan, and tell me so if I am. There's still a part of me that looks in this and says, this feels like lightning in a bottle. As much as I like the grit and the depth and the intensity and the no quit and all of the different things that Carlisle's team has top to bottom, I don't see them winning another one if they get this one.
I mean, it's always more likely that you're not going to win than that you are, right? And we haven't seen a repeat champion since the KD Warriors. So it's like, it's the nature of the marathon of, and you guys saw it with the Celtics, like having to go that 100 plus games and then come back the next season and start all over again from zero. It's grueling, and teams often
Olympics didn't help.
Olympics didn't help either, right? It's a grueling set of circumstances. So that would not surprise me at all. What I would say is, in terms of giving yourself the opportunity, they have right now their top 9, or 9 of their top 10 rather, from the season still under contract for next year. The only one who's not is Miles Turner, and the loud indications out of Indiana are that they are willing to go into the luxury tax for the first time, I think, ever, or if not ever, then in many years, to re-sign him, to bring him back, because they understand how important having a floor spacing 5 is for this whole ecosystem, right? So if you go into it with, we're bringing the whole top 10 back, we have, to whatever degree you can, mitigate some of the wearing the tread off the tires by playing 11 guys the whole way, and being able to keep their minutes somewhat down as you go through it. And there continue to be guys like Jarris Walker, who hasn't played in this series because he got injured late in the Knicks series, but they're really high on him and the value that he can bring. They are reportedly pretty high on their rookie from this year, Johnny Furphy, who obviously is the very fringes of that rotation. Like, there might be more bodies they can kind of integrate in. Carlisle this seems like a style and a structure that the more deposits they put into it, the more they're going to get out of it. Obviously, that does not mean that they're going to rip off 58 wins and, waltz to the title again next year. But none of the luck devil magic thing, I think a lot of it comes down to the downstream effects of how their physicality and their style impacts their opponents night after night after night. And that there's a lot of legit shot makers on this team. So shooting variance is one thing. Whether guys can make shots is another one. And you're talking basically everyone in their rotation is a legit threat to make tough shots, has shown a capacity to make a number of shots in tight games against contests. Aaron Nesmith is not going to make 6 running to his left breakneck sprint off the catch, chuck it in threes every game. But if he does it once, you win a playoff game, right? Obi Toppin's not going to make 5 or 6 threes, spacing the floor off swings every game. But if he does it once, you win a playoff game. Halliburton, I think at this point we can feel pretty confident that he's going to make more of those than he misses, even if he's not going to shoot 90% on them next season like he did this year. Turner, you have to honor out there. Nembhard, you have to honor out there. On and on down the line. Again, it goes back to construction. It goes back to the way they've built this team. They've prioritized the way that guys run and the way they shoot and the way they share the ball. And in terms of a structure that could be repeatable, there's a hell of a lot worse ways to go than that, especially when you pair it with a defense that it's never going to be this 25 Thunder, right? But they are, for 6 months now, a top 10 defense. They've figured out a system. All these guys have learned it and have worked within it to be able to figure out where we need to help one another, where we need to funnel the ball, how we execute our scheme. And you bring everybody back with that. Nobody's an over the hill player. I think the only older vet on this team is Siakam, and I don't think he's in any danger of breaking down anytime soon. So the opportunity is there for them. it's always more likely that something's not going to happen than that it does. But the structure of the way the East is laid out right now, I think they would stand certainly an excellent chance of having an opportunity to get back, if not this far, then certainly another deep playoff run. Like that's the way this team is kind of put together.
I'll push back on that just because I think this, and we always have to make this about the Celtics because we're on this podcast. Yeah. I would argue that the Celtics this year and the Nuggets last year and all these one-off champions would show you that, like, once you get the opportunity to get there, like, you got to finish the deal. You know, like, you
Absolutely.
have to get through it because you don't know when he'll be back. Like, we all assumed that KD, Russ, and Harden and Ibaka would compete forever, and they didn't. And so you look at, like, I mean, Kaufman, how many times in the text threads that we have going on, we said, oh, thank God they won last year because
they got the one, right?
They got the one because now the monkey's off the back. Now 7-0, going to the rafters. Like, we don't have to do this. Like, we're good. What I'll say is, like, this Thunder team, if they do not win the NBA title this year, you thought the noise against the Celtics was really bad. This is going to be a whole different animal because this is by the numbers, one of the most impressive regular season teams in the history of basketball. And yes, are they built for long-term success? Absolutely. They have Shea, they have J-Dub, they have a gajillion picks, they have a great coach, they have a great front office, they have all these things. And yet, the CBA and injuries can take everything and just rip it apart immediately. Mm-hmm. So as we sit here and say, like, oh yeah, I could totally see this, you know, both these teams getting back and maybe make another deep run next year. I would tell you that's not guaranteed because of the way the CBA is currently set up and because of just sheer randomness of injury luck and shooting luck and all these things. I mean, Boston has 2 horrific meltdown games against the Knicks.
Yep.
And then Tatum has the worst injury we've seen in the Celtics uniform since KG went down. Right?
Well, look, I mean, I think there's an alternate timeline where if the Celtics win those first 2 games, Tatum doesn't even get hurt.
Right. So and that's my point. Like, with the shooting variance we have, with the injuries that happen more frequently in this league, and with the CBA throwing a grenade into this whole thing, I would argue, like, no, you can't just assume these teams are going to be back here next year because of the way this league is moving.
Yeah,
and I think the Celtics are a great example for that.
To be clear, I'm not like projecting and predicting that the Pacers are going to go back to back. I'm saying, like, if you looking at the nature, the way the East is laid out, and looking at the way their roster is constructed, looking at the way that their continuity has continued to bear fruit now, like, they've put themselves in as good a position as you can be in for them to be able to do it again. Like, they're not looking at an offseason where they got to figure out, what the hell do we do next year? How do we replace guy X, Y, or Z? Like, they are on a sort of comfortable stretch of road. But you're absolutely right. There's, like, absolutely nothing is guaranteed. The Thunder are, you know, as you mentioned, that Harden era Thunder, like, are the absolute example of that. And so that's why when you get to these places, if you have to finish the job. And so the Thunder have not, obviously the Thunder are in a difficult position now. The Pacers have not done that yet. Rick Carlisle has been extraordinarily adamant in, like, refusing praise and to acknowledge the potential of anything just beyond his reach, because it's just, you know, whatever, day 8 of 19 and we've got to keep going, and, like, tomorrow's day 9 and that's it. That's all we can do. Because you got to finish the job. And if you don't get all the way there, then what was it all for? So you're absolutely right. It is way more likely that we are talking about 2 completely different teams here next year, just like we were talking about 2 completely different teams here last year. But these teams have set themselves up about as well as you can to be able to give yourself multiple bites at the apple.
I was laughing because, you know, we're watching Nesmith do what he did in Game 3, and obviously that was not isolated in this playoff run. He has had some monster moments, and, you know, was a more than serviceable starting player, rotation player throughout the regular season, and has been for multiple years now. So it's none of this is new unless you are a very casual NBA fan. You're not really paying attention. I tweeted something to the effect of, you know, Celtics fans out there watching Aaron Nesmith as the player that everyone hoped he would become, basically, in Boston. And, you know, it drove me crazy. A friend of mine responded, who is a basketball fan, responded to the tweets like, how many Celtics fans do you think even remember that Nesmith played for the Celtics? And I was like, a lot, actually. Like, I mean, maybe not people that again, sort of tune in, tune out the NBA, but people that are ardent Boston Celtics fans are well aware that Aaron Nesmith was, it was Nesmith and it was Pritchard, and it was that draft class with all of this hope. And, Pritchard, despite requesting a trade at one point in time, wound up eventually, materializing and becoming that guy. And obviously he's the sixth man of the year. Nesmith did as well, just not in Boston, elsewhere, because, in Boston, there wasn't, the roster was too deep. There wasn't that space for him to kind of blossom. It took Pritchard a while too, even when Nesmith got, very, limited opportunity. He couldn't take advantage of it, needed a change of scenery. And like you said, the Celtics needed a guy like Brogdon, came in, helped out. He was pivotal. They won a championship, all of that. But it's funny. Like there were a lot of people that responded to that tweet, like with vitriol toward Nesmith, as if he did something wrong, like good riddance, hope he never comes back to Boston kind of thing. I was like, I'm doing nothing but rooting this guy on and wishing him well and marveling at his success, because again, it like somewhere Danny Ainge smiles, right? Like this feels like a situation where it's like another sort of belated hit for Ainge and for the Celtics that just, caught on elsewhere, whether it was, like Max Strus in a very different way, or, you can't even really use him as much as I want to, because I wanted him to be a Celtic, but, Desmond Bane, like, he was just drafted technically by the Celtics and immediately shipped away. But like these types of guys that it was like, man, if only there had been a spot for them and that room to see what they could become. And there just wasn't, obviously, for Nesmith here. What do you make of this progression and fitting so perfectly in with this Indiana team?
Well, I think that it's to some degree about like what the Celtics brass saw in him and why the evaluation was, we think he'd be a good fit for us. All of that stuff is what makes him a good fit in Indiana, right? Where obviously he's developed a ton as a shooter, but the physicality on defense, the way he'll hammer the glass, like he's a good rebounder for a 6'5" wing, 6'6" wing. The defensive intensity, the speed that he moves at, conditioning that he does have. He's not like obviously a great creator off the ball, but he can put the ball on the deck and drive. He will go up and try to take somebody's head off at the rim if he has the opportunity to. Like all of the things that made him somebody that you could see fitting in that wing core in Boston are what help him fit in here really well, and without needing to be a primary or even like secondary or tertiary scoring threat, but like somebody that if the ball swings his way, he's not going to hesitate to let it fly. Those things that Ainge and the front office evaluated and said, like, we think that will work here. He has developed all, and tons of credit to him for putting the work in on his game to be able to develop those things, and on the front office in Indiana for seeing those things, and for the coaching staff to help him maximize that. But yeah, you can't have a roster of 30 guys who are all ready to play behind, waiting for their chance until Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum, ask out, right? Like it's like, I need a sub, and then you get your other all-star team or your other team of like a complement of 6'6" switchable 40% 3-point shooting wings all behind them to all come into the mix. Like at a certain point, the minutes are what they are and the opportunities are what they are, and you've got to move your roster around in ways that makes the most sense for you at the time. So I think what I've made of Nesmith is, this is an indication of him having validated a lot of that confidence that people had in him pre-draft. It's never fun to see those things develop in another uniform. I mean, going back to the Knicks fans, in my life, there's a lot of grousing about Obi Toppin getting traded for 2 second-round picks. And it's, the coaching staff and the front office, the front office believed in him. The coaching staff didn't really trust him behind Julius Randle all that much. Julius Randle made 2 All-NBA teams, and they made the playoffs a few times, and Obi got minutes, but not a ton of them. And, he found a team that fit better and that really fit for his skill set and the way he ran, the way he played. So sometimes it's just, as you said, change of scenery can do wonders for a guy, and it can help bring all of those things that other people saw in him out.
I hate doing this just because it's a real hard pivot, but considering the time that we have left here, I kind of have to do this because we haven't talked about Jaylen yet.
Sure.
Went under the knife, got arthroscopic surgery on the knee to clean it up and get him ready for the rumor is, and they said, I think Shams had the report of, they expect him to be ready for training camp.
Right.
He hit 25, 26. However, to keep this Pacers thing sort of
who's training camp? Is that your question?
No. The idea here is like the Celtics, as they try and reshape this roster and get underneath certain thresholds and aprons and whatever, they have an opportunity to maybe do a real hard reset here with Jaylen Brown. If you had to pick who's the most valuable player on the roster, it's obviously Tatum. After that, you could argue Brown's contract versus White's contract, et cetera, et cetera. I'll try and make this quick. We've had conversations, Kaufman and I, with a bunch of people, and one of them has put to us that it would be financially irresponsible for the Celtics not to trade Jaylen Brown this year because of the way that their team is set up, with Jason not being really a part of the team next year. This would be the hard reset, and I think Matt Moore mentioned this, Kaufman, last week. The hard reset that Denver has been trying to do but can't do because they have Nikola Jokic and he's the best player in the world, and you have to keep competing.
Right.
Given the circumstances, is this the offseason where the Celtics need to take a hard look at this and say, look, I know it's going to stink. I know it's going to really hurt everybody, but we have to trade Jaylen Brown. Is this the year they have to do it, or can they build? I mean, and again, keeping the Pacers like, okay, they have Halliburton and they don't have another guy in that top 15, but then they have Siakam and Turner and et cetera. Is that the way Boston should look to maybe build going forward, given the fact that this next season is going to be kind of a throwaway?
Yeah, I think so much of it is just, is the juice worth the squeeze? If you tell me what the offers are for Jaylen Brown, I can tell you what I think about that. I can tell you what I think about it. But it would be, I would agree that it would be irresponsible to not at least listen and to not at least see what the opportunities are out there. If there's a way that by moving off of him, breaking his contract into several rotation players, and multiple picks moving forward. If that's something that gives you the opportunity to, to a greater optionality moving forward, I think you got to pay attention to that. You got to at least be willing to consider it. But just moving him, even if it's for, relatively pennies on the dollar, just to be able to get off the deal, I think that probably is that seems like a real dicey choice to make. You talk about, which contract has the most value, or I would imagine, just not as saying one player is better than the other, but I would imagine you're probably going to get a higher class of offer for Derek White than you would for Jaylen Brown, just because Derek White fits everywhere and the contract's not as big. So you might not be able to get quite as much back, but the value of what you get might be better. All of which is to say, I think that they have to listen to everything, because they've been put in a situation where, yes, you have this, the crisis creates an opportunity. If you're able to find the right thread the needle moves to get out of it. The other thing that I just think about with giant contracts is, a year from now, that is one fewer year on the giant contract, which then perhaps makes it more palatable to move, and somebody might be more willing to take on the giant contract if it's a little less giant. So if there's not a bowl you over, this is a no-brainer offer now, I think keeping a player that you love, that is a multiple-time All-Star for you, that's going to go in the rafters, as you mentioned, there's not so many downsides to that if you don't feel that there's value on the back end.
Dan Devine is a senior NBA writer over at Yahoo. Like me, he is someone that enjoys going to the barber and just sitting there silently while his hair is being cut.
Oh, that was the best. Oh my God, that was so good.
There's nothing like it.
What is this? What is this going on here? Am I missing out on a barber?
It's okay. I wrote something a little, I don't even know, 2 months ago or something like that, where it's just there's a lot of me in my head. And after having talked to you guys for an hour, I think you guys get the vibe of a lot of me talking. And so I was just I had to go find a spot between multiple appointments before I went out to go do something. And I was like, oh man, I don't want to do small talk. I just want to shut my mouth and shut my brain off for a while.
Right.
And it was gorgeous. It was the best feeling. Just got out of my head for a minute. It was great. So yes, every once in a while, just powering down.
Delightful. Yeah, I'm just gonna sit there. You do your thing. You're making small talk all day with a bunch of random people. You probably don't feel like talking to me anymore, and I feel like engaging with you at the moment. Sometimes
let's give each other this gift of shutting up for a while.
Just
imagine
sit
that.
there and take a break. Dan is on Twitter at YourManDevine. Again, just long of the NBA column writing community and overdue to have you on here with us. We greatly appreciate your time, Dan. Obviously, we'll have to do it again, and hopefully this NBA Final Series continues to deliver over the next, whatever it is, 2 to 4 games that this thing plays itself out, because it's been an absolute blast, and you get a front row seat for it.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute treat. I would say what I'm looking for is 2 incredible games that end with Pacers in 5 so I can get the hell home. That's what I'm rooting for. At this time of the season, what we ask my wife, what do we root for in this family? We root for sweeps. So we're trying to get out of here. But yes, it's as long as it lasts, I will be excited to be able to watch it. So thanks so much for having me, guys.
Reminds me too of beat writers oftentimes, and obviously Dan is not that, he covers the league, but beat writers of specific teams will typically tell you once their fandom has completely left their bodies, hey, exciting playoffs, right? This would be great. And the response is usually either, I hope they get swept in the first round, or they win the whole thing, and there is no in between.
No in between. That's
no
exactly
in between.
Right.
For Dan, Evan Valenti, I'm Adam Kaufman. Again, rate, review, subscribe to the Celtics Beat podcast. Check us out on the CLNS All Access page on YouTube as well. We'll do it again next week when maybe we will have an NBA champion.